I am Miguel Santana, President and CEO of the Weingart Foundation and Chair of the Committee for Greater LA, a diverse coalition of civic, business, labor, foundation, government, and community leaders who came together at the dawn of the pandemic to propose bold solutions that confront the systemic failures exposed and worsened by the pandemic. No other issue manifests LA's broken and unaccountable systems more than homelessness. It is the number one issue all Angelenos care about, and with good reason. Homelessness is something that all Angelenos encounter in their everyday lives, from going to work and school or just going shopping. Like sunshine and traffic, homelessness is now part of the LA brand. That is not something to be proud of. Several months ago, the committee called for one central, neutral, independent, non-governmental body made up of experts, homeless service providers on the ground, people who are formerly homeless, and city and county leaders to work under one plan. As part of this work, through a series of focus groups, we asked Angelenos what they think. Their answers may surprise you. They certainly did us. Today, you will hear from Derry Stragro, a longtime political consultant who brought in Ethan Axelrod to conduct a series of focus groups of Angelenos to share their thoughts on this issue. Following Derry, you will hear from Sarah Dusso, an advocate on this issue and part of the Committee for Greater LA. But first, you will hear from my colleague, Peter Longhorn, President and CEO of the Conrad and Hilton Foundation. Peter and his foundation have been leaders in making investments in Southern California to end homelessness. Peter.
Thanks, Miguel. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today and making time to hear these important perceptions from Angelenos on the issue of homelessness. As Miguel said, my name is Peter Longhorn. I'm the president of the Conrad and Hilton Foundation. We're a global foundation that calls LA home, and our mission is to improve the lives of people living in poverty and experiencing disadvantage throughout the world. I'm honored to serve as co-chair with Miguel for the Committee for Greater LA's Housing and Homelessness Action Team. And like all of you, homelessness is top of mind for this committee. The research that we will present offers insights on how Angelenos think about this issue and shows how our region can offer a pathway to achieve solutions that we know work to reduce homelessness. I'll give a few introductory remarks, and then I'll turn it over to Derry to provide a summary of what we've learned. And after that, Miguel will offer his thoughts and facilitate questions. So why this emphasis on tackling something as abstract as poor governance in the homelessness area? Well, for the last 30 years, the Hilton Foundation has been investing in housing first and permanent housing to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. Just in the last decade alone, we've made nearly $175 million in grants to our partners working in Los Angeles to help connect people experiencing homelessness to housing. These efforts have included launching the Flexible Housing Subsidy Pool, an innovative and nationally recognized supportive housing rent subsidy program that supports thousands of people with exiting homelessness each year in Los Angeles. But we are concerned that the investments that we, other foundations, and indeed the city and the county of Los Angeles are making are not meeting their potential because of the confusion in governance. It's improving governance across systems is crucial and complementary to these efforts. We know that the solutions to homelessness are permanent housing and supportive services, but we experience obstacles when public dollars and systems are fragmented and hyperlocal. It's extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the county of LA, the largest in the nation, the city of LA, the second largest in the nation, and the 87 other cities in this county to agree on the policies and practices needed to reduce homelessness. These governance issues extend well beyond the LA Homeless Services Authority and the continuums of care. They involve many different departments and systems that have diffuse authorities over housing, land use, services, data collection, and more. Our neighbors rely on the services and supports of several county and city agencies when trying to avoid homelessness, experiencing it, or resolving it. housed and unhoused Angelenos alike understand this. Our conversations with them clearly show a demand for regional coherence, for the ability to hold a single entity accountable, as my grandmother used to say, a single neck to throttle, and for that entity to be able to make progress. People experiencing homelessness feel this fragmentation and the lack of accountability as they seek to navigate a very challenging public system instead of what should be a client-centered one. And voters see that resources are uncoordinated and worry that they are being wasted. A path forward requires shared policies and practices, coordination across agencies, and accountability to an independent agency that can get us to proven solutions. We're committed to advancing this effort. Our partners and grantees are working to house Angelenos every day. We support this effort because we know from our experience that when you pair financial investments with coordinated effort across public and private systems that hold themselves accountable, this will amplify everyone's impact. We saw this in Los Angeles when the Home for Good Funders Collaborative and other system partners quadrupled successful housing efforts from 5,000 to 20,000 per year with the addition of Measure H funding and the launch of the flexible housing subsidy pool. We saw this across the country with a successful effort to house veterans, decreasing veteran homelessness by 47% from 2010 to 2016, when the federal government made major investments in veteran homelessness. These efforts reflect the importance of coordination and of accountability to effectively spend public funds to end homelessness. And finally, I'd like to say we are all committed to hearing from and listening to the unhoused, to amplifying their voices, and to ensuring that they are in leadership roles in this work. Central to our work and our values is to amplify the voices and leadership of those who have been and who are experiencing homelessness. We want to see them leading the way throughout the system, including at the top. And as Derry will describe, LA voters share our view on this. So in closing, we're grateful for your attention, look forward to your continued partnership and to spreading the word on this. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Derry Stragro. For those of you who don't know him, Derry is a long-term consultant who deeply understands politics and popular opinion in the LA area. The Committee for Greater LA brought him on board to support work and to get a citizen perspective. So Derry, let me hand this over to you now. Thanks.
Peter, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here because I think that we have achieved something pretty significant, which is a clear picture of what homelessness looks like to people who live in Los Angeles. That was the goal of this project. It was to listen. Sometimes you just have to listen to the voters, listen to the people, and you'll learn a lot when you do that. So we conducted 6 focus groups. We talked to, or listened to make my point, voters of all ages, ethnicities, both genders, from all parts of the county, and we learned a lot. The first thing we learned, and much of this will not come as a surprise to you, is that everyone in LA encounters homelessness all the time. When you go to the store, when your kids go to school, when you go to work, when you go to take a walk, whatever, homelessness is essentially everywhere. And to say that voters are frustrated by the problem is a gross understatement, but it's important to understand what frustrates them and what their expectations are. First of all, in Los Angeles, there is an absolute, total, complete, without exception, lack of faith in city and county government to address homelessness. I mean, in all the years I've watched focus groups or conducted focus groups, and it's, in the hundreds, been doing this for decades, never have I seen this kind of consistency in focus group results. We talked to white and men, women, a mixed gender group of African Americans, of Latinos, Chinese Americans. We talked to millennial voters, and the answers were the same, unprompted, every time. Voters are totally frustrated with what they perceive as an inability of city and county government to effectively deal with homelessness. Uniform. Number 2, they see a complete lack of accountability with respect to how funds that are dedicated to helping the homeless and reducing homelessness are being spent. They have no way to, they have no idea how that money is being spent. They have no confidence that it's being spent properly. Number three, and this is very important, voters do not have the expectation that we are suddenly somehow going to eradicate homelessness in Los Angeles. Again, uniformly, they see this as a problem that is going to be around for a long time. And what they're looking for is a realistic plan with clear measures and goals and a system of accountability to measure whether or not those goals are being met. That's very, very important. They want realistic goals. They want them to be ambitious enough to generate momentum and to make progress. And that means moving people into housing, getting them off the streets and getting them into housing. Number four, they have a lot more faith in nonprofit organizations and in other private organizations to do the work that is needed here, particularly given that they expect and they demand accountability and transparency in terms of how the programs are going, what their goals are, what progress is being made, and how the money that's available to them is being spent. They do not have an appetite for further tax increases that are labeled as being for the purpose of resolving the homelessness issue. They are aware of previous measures like H and Triple H. They have no idea how that money is being spent. They don't see any progress. And particularly given some of the events that have unfolded in LA City, they frankly think the money is winding up in people's pockets. They have a very positive response to an independent organization, and they have a very positive response to that organization being governed with the help of people who have been homeless. They believe that people who've had the experience of being homeless need to be part of crafting an effective solution, that you can't do it from a bureaucratic city office. Can't happen that way. They don't expect that homelessness is going to be eradicated altogether. They just don't, but they want to see substantial progress. The issue with homelessness for them is that there are several different groups of people who are homeless, and they think that there needs to be a very clear effort to identify people who are homeless and find the category into which they fit, and then create solutions and deliver solutions for people who are in those categories. One category is people who have mental health issues. Those people, they think, need to be housed in a place where the people with mental health issues are not going to cause themselves harm and are not going to cause people in the community harm. The second group, and they see this as a very sizable group, are people who are substance abusers. They believe those substance abusers need to be removed from the streets, given safe housing, and put into rehab and receive rehab services till they're ready to be back in the community. The third group are people who have fallen on hard times. They've just hit difficult times. And all they need, from the point of view of the people in the focus groups, the voters, is the delivery of services in a coordinated, effective way to maximize the prospects that people who have hit a hard time, particularly, for example, during the pandemic, can get themselves back on their feet. So they see those three groups very clearly. They see different needs. They see different programs to meet those needs. And the most important, I suppose the most important part of this is they are not hostile to homeless people. That just doesn't exist. They are fearful of homeless people. There are a lot of homeless encampments that frankly disgust them. They don't want to have to encounter them. But they have empathy. They want the problem solved. They don't want to punish homeless people. They want to help homeless people get back on their feet to the extent that they can. And if they can't get back on their feet, they want to make sure that those folks are housed and well taken care of. So those are the highlights. I mean, we can delve into this more, but those are some of the key findings. And it was, I keep saying this, no space, no difference amongst the people in the focus groups. And the one thing I will add is that In Los Angeles, people know we have 88 cities and the county, and they see no coordination. They see some smaller cities doing a better job on homelessness than others. They see the effort to deal with homelessness in the city of LA as an abject failure. They see some smaller cities attempting to solve their homeless problem by pushing homeless people back into LA City. And that just doesn't work for voters. It's a balloon, right? You push in one side of the balloon and the balloon pops out on the other side, and they see that. So they don't want to be played with. They don't want to be told that one particular city council district or one particular community is going to resolve the homelessness problem, because they know, first of all, the homeless folks will just move elsewhere, number one, and number two, they will eventually come back where they were in the first place. So I'll stop with that and turn it over to Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Dusso. I am an advocate in the LA region for people experiencing homelessness and for housing opportunities. I serve on the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority Commission, and I also serve on the newly created Blue Ribbon Commission on homelessness reform, looking at the issue of governance. And I had the honor of I've been appointed by Supervisor Hilda Solis to those two positions. And I really appreciate the Committee for Greater LA's work to be able to research further into how we better communicate with voters in the region. And it was a wonderful opportunity to sit in on these focus groups and really hear firsthand. I think that what is important to lift up is a few things. One is that folks, systems change is not sexy. And across the board, different voters really were very clear that that's what they want. In this case, they really want to see systems change. And then the other piece that I think is important to lift up is the fact that even though folks are incredibly frustrated with the lack of progress, that they remain empathetic. And they remain empathetic because homelessness is affecting almost everyone in the region. Personally, I myself have a brother who's experiencing homelessness and suffering from mental illness. And so many of the people in the focus groups had those same experiences, a family member or they themselves. And so it was very clear that whether it was for economic reasons or other reasons, that homelessness has become so pervasive that's the reason it is the number one issue in this region. A lot of folks are saying, oh, it's become the number one issue because of the proliferation of encampments. Well, actually, what seemed pretty clear from a lot of folks in these focus groups is it's the number one issue because they're very aware of how this is affecting them and their family. So I just want to lift that up. Also, just the fact that folks were just really sophisticated in their discussions, that they are aware of a lot of attempts at good work, but are as I said, very frustrated with the lack of progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. At this time, we encourage folks to ask questions in the chat, and I'm going to be a little bit of a referee in directing them to my colleagues. There's a first question that kind of builds on the point that Sarah, you made earlier, really about, is this really a result of the pandemic? Or is there something deeper here that we should try to understand? So I'll ask Sarah, and then certainly Derry, Ethan, or Peter, if you want to also answer.
In terms of the perception of the voters, I think that it was clear that they're aware that the pandemic has made it worse, and an understanding that there was a worsening, but that it was getting worse before. So as the quote, for example, that was up on the screen a few minutes ago, the gentleman who said the last 5 years, again, the pandemic hasn't been going on 5 years. So there is an overall perception that it was getting worse going into the pandemic, and then the pandemic just pushed quite a few of these issues off the cliff. So similar to the work of the Great Committee for Greater LA, these were deep systemic issues that Los Angeles was struggling with prior that the pandemic really exposed.
Thanks. Derry, Ethan, is there anything you want to add?
I think Barbara had asked about three things: the pandemic, which Sarah addressed. The visibility of homelessness is clearly a huge factor, and a lot of their impressions are being driven by what they're seeing, and so they have an impression that a lot of the homeless population in the county is experiencing addiction issues or mental health problems. Largely, it became clear as a function of these are the people who they're sort of seeing more often. And that are making a sort of visceral impact on their impressions. So I think the visibility of homelessness is absolutely a huge factor driving impressions here. And then as far as the plummeting trust in government, it's fair to point out that this is happening in the context of declining trust all over the country and in a lot of different areas. The level of declining trust that we saw here, I think exceeded what I've seen elsewhere. And the specificity with which they see the failures on homelessness in LA County is something that is also unique on this issue. They're aware of specific policies, specific things like HHH that they don't see as had an impact. They're aware of some of the policy nuances in a way that goes beyond a simple sort of knee-jerk mistrust of government.
Look, I would just say it's what Sarah and Ethan said, right? I mean, it's true. The pandemic's made it worse, but there is another piece that particularly affects perceptions of LA City's failure on this. And I'll just note that, people are aware of stuff that's been in the headlines recently about activities and events that are unfolding in the city of LA, and it registers with them. And that adds to the context in which they see this.
Thanks, Derry. There's a question on the specific role of philanthropy. Peter, do you want to answer that question?
Sure, it's a great question and a very positive one, I think. There is a strong tradition of philanthropic support for the fight against homelessness. The Home for Good Funders Collaborative is deep and wide and is accepting and encouraging of all new volunteers. So please get in touch with us about how you can dock into that. There are 300 foundations in Southern California. Every one of them has this on their radar. I would call on each of them to up their game in homelessness, regardless of what their particular focus is, because it is an issue that engages all of us. And there are lots of places for creativity. There funding service delivery that complements what city and county can do, funding advocacy to make sure that this issue keeps going. And then Daniel's specific question about the capital that foundations dispose of is very important. He mentioned PRIs that we and others are doing, the program-related investments. These are really important, not just grants, but also loans. And particularly when you're looking at nonprofit housing developers, or even organizations like the LA Homelessness Services Authority that Sarah has chaired. We knew, for example, at Hilton, that they were going to have liquidity problems getting money from state and federal sources out onto the street. So we gave a $5 million PRI that would increase liquidity and allow them to function more efficiently. Foundations can do that. Foundations who are using all of their assets for mission investing have tremendous investment opportunities and unlocking capital. But I would emphasize that it's not going to be foundation capital that solves this. It's going to be foundation capital that catalyzes private sector and government capital. You can be the loss leader. You could be the top line risk. You can be the angel investor, but do it always with an eye to making it possible for government and the private sector to step in effectively. Thanks.
I would thank you, Peter, and I would just add, the reason why our two foundations have come together with other philanthropic efforts is that part of our role is to raise the harder questions, to get to the heart of the matter, to really propose different solutions to the ones that have been tried so far. And our work supporting the Committee for Greater LA has been a significant vehicle to partner with others in the community to move these issues forward. There's a question specifically on the issue of NIMBYism. How did that surface in the focus group? So Derry, Ethan, I welcome you to answer that.
We did, it's a really good question. And we did ask a question sort of posing a hypothetical because, everybody had expressed at some point in the group the need for more shelters and places to house homeless people. So we posed this specific hypothetical, what if there were a homeless shelter built and up and operating, within a few blocks from your home. And to be honest, the answers to that varied quite a bit. One of the key factors that sort of told us how people were responding to that was just the level of homelessness that they were already observing in their area. So, for example, a lot of the folks who lived in cities outside of the city of Los Angeles, they were pretty well aware in their observation that there weren't a ton of homeless encampments already in their area. It's more something they had observed in other parts of the county. So when we posed that idea to them, there was some pretty harsh reaction to that. People didn't want a homeless shelter close to them. By contrast, when we asked people, especially living in the city of LA, but also elsewhere where they had sort of experienced more visible homelessness in their area, their attitude was, homeless people are already living on my block, near my house. At least if we had a shelter there, it would be a little more controlled. People would have services they need. So it varied, but generally, the problem is such in a lot of areas in Los Angeles County that people are sort of thinking, that could only be an improvement over the status quo.
Yeah, I think that I mean, you just heard it from Ethan. When you start to talk about, okay, where are the people who are currently homeless going to be housed? You get a range of answers, and so I think that when you start talking at this level of specificity, it's important to be sensitive to what the perceptions are where you're trying to place the housing. If you are surrounded by people who are living in homeless encampments right in front of you, then my perception, Ethan, I think you just said this, is they're okay with a homeless a housed facility that's near them, because at least the folks are no longer on the street. When they're not encountering that level of homelessness, they would prefer that the housing be further away. That's a general rule. But part of this is you just have to level with people. I mean, again, what we're saying here is everybody knows there's the problem. Everybody's empathetic. So when you start to talk specifics about, okay, where are we going to move the people who are now homeless, there's a variety of reactions to that. And that's just something that has to be flagged.
Thanks, Jerry. So there's another question there's a series of questions that sort of touch on the same issue. So given what Angelenos are saying, what is the answer? What is the best solution moving forward? How should candidates be thinking about this issue, and what kind of proposals should they be moving ahead? So I'll ask Sarah and Peter to talk about what makes sense from what voters are saying, and what could be the next step. You're on mute, Sarah.
Sorry, thanks. I was trying to scroll through because there's so many questions relating to that. So one person was asking, Zev in fact was asking what kind of systems change. Someone's asking, what about LASA being that regional authority? And I think that again, we're not pushing a specific plan in this moment. We're trying to talk to people and listen, as Derry was saying, to what voters are asking for. And I think what was clear is that they want accountability that is just easy to understand. They want to know what's the goal, what's the goal that I can buy into, and who's going to be accountable for that goal. And they also want that to be in across sectors. So back to even addressing the issue of NIMBYism, they're very aware of the cycle of arresting folks and then releasing, and somebody is literally right back into an encampment. So that jail cycle, they're aware of placements that fall through. They're really tired and frustrated by the lack of progress that is real progress. That's not just moving a group of people from one block to another. So in terms of what that means, at the end of the day, what is good news here is that voters are pretty sophisticated and really want to have a conversation about change across the entire system, where we can engage in, we're going to set a big goal. This is how we're going to get to that goal. Everyone's got to buy in. That may mean more housing in your neighborhood, and we've got to go for it. That's what these results show, that despite this huge level of frustration, people are still ready and willing to buy into a very big goal and some big change.
Peter.
I think everything that Sarah said is spot on. And I think, Miguel opened by saying sunshine, traffic, and homelessness. And I think the fourth thing is just got to be chaotic governance. That's the way we grew up, organically. No one intended it to be this way, but it has become this way, and it doesn't work. We need a governance that is set up to solve problems. And as Sarah said, a clear plan, mobilization around it, are elected and appointed officials ceding some of their individual autonomy in order to be able to work well, committing from the beginning to collaborate with one another, and saying that's the goal. And I think one of the questions referenced the LA Times article last Sunday on Houston. And let me be unpopular in California by saying there ought to be a hashtag saying Houston Envy, because they have organized to cut homelessness in half over the last 10 years when we've seen it grow. And this can be done, but it requires commitment, it requires clarity of vision, and it requires everyone joining together and working on, to achieve that goal. Thanks.
Derry, Ethan, anything that you want to add based on what we heard from Angelenos as to what the solution is? What does it look like? What doesn't it look like?
I'll take a shot, and then Ethan. Again, they want an organization that's independent, that is not made up of elected officials. They want homeless people with homeless experience to be part of that. They want accountability, they want transparency, but they can't name something specific. I mean, the closest we got probably is that the older people in the groups remembered the 1984 Olympics, and they couldn't remember his name, but they invoked Peter Ueberroth. That's what they wanted. Their perception was that there was this organization that did a great job in the Olympics in 1984 and brought everybody together and coordinated everybody, and let's do that. So again, I'm not sure any of us know precisely how to get this done, but we know what it is that has to, certainly from these groups, we know what has to happen. Ethan?
I would just echo what everybody else said. I think everybody said it very well. And the only other thing is, just a renewed energy toward tangible, realistic goals. There's a sense right now of a sort of complacency that people are, in a sense, throwing their hands up in the air. And just a renewed sense of we can solve this. Nobody thinks that we can eliminate homelessness, as Derry mentioned earlier, but that we have a goal. We have a goal to reduce homelessness by X amount in this number of years, and we think it's really tangible and doable. And then moving toward that goal as opposed to the status quo.
And Miguel, one point that's really important to emphasize is programmatically, we know what to do. We know that the answer is supportive housing, that it's more housing units, and it's services that are coordinated. So I think the programmatic piece is clear. What is not clear is what has not been clear is how to get everyone to unite around it and deliver it effectively.
Thank you. Well, I certainly sat on a number of these focus groups, and I think what was very clear, as been shared, is that Angelenos are actually pretty sophisticated. They understand why things aren't working. They know what it costs to build housing. They know the disconnect between the cities and the county on issues of mental health and other services. And they know that no one entity could do it by itself, separately. So the city can't solve homelessness on its own, the county cannot. It requires an independent body that really lays out a path forward where everyone is rowing in the same direction. And I think going back to the point that Peter made, it is being clear as to who's in charge and developing a consensus on the approach and being honest with people about what it's going to take to get there. And then an independent perspective on the progress or the lack of progress that's being made. So the next question really is for Ethan on the methodology. How were the different folks in the focus group selected? Were there people who experienced homelessness in the focus groups? Could you talk a little bit about the approach that you and Derry took?
Yeah, so we set out to hear from a diverse group of audiences throughout the county. To do that, we recruited everybody from panels of folks who at some point opted into possibly being a part of the focus group, and we set about administering a screening survey to sort of narrow it down to the exact folks we wanted in the room. So these are folks who have opted into taking a survey, and then they fit our specifications in terms of ethnicity, in terms of age, in terms of their ideology and partisanship. We wanted to sort of rule out outlier opinions and sort of get roughly people who meet the sort of mainstreams of the different audiences we were trying to talk to, and so forth. We did end up we didn't specifically screen to get people who had experienced homelessness in these focus groups, but we did actually have a couple people who are not currently experiencing homelessness but had in the past, which I think speaks to the ubiquity of the issue. And in addition to those folks, we had other people who had family members or loved ones who were experiencing homelessness currently. And what was striking is the degree to which, and this it's sort of a theme that Derry hit on right at the beginning, is the degree to which their opinions were really similar to the rest of the participants who hadn't experienced homelessness as directly, in terms of a lack of coordination, in terms of needing more accountability, in terms of needing to be a little more assertive in terms of bringing services and treatment to people, as opposed to voluntary things like that. But we did end up hearing from some folks that experienced homelessness.
Jerry, anything you want to add?
No, not really. I mean, it was a very broad sample. Again, we said this at the beginning, just for the record, this is not a quantitative research effort. It's qualitative, and we picked people from a very broad range of experiences, including homeless people. Because again, the intent was to learn as much as we could, and are there things we didn't learn? Probably, but we got a pretty clear sense of what's going on.
Thank you. So, Sarah, there's a number of questions specifically looking at the intersection between mental health and homelessness. Can you talk about sort of what you heard in the context of that intersection during the focus groups?
Sure. It was one of the pieces that showed that voters remain empathetic. There was a lot of complete frustration with the fact that this is a medical issue and people are not getting access to medical care. And that was in the ones that I observed, and even looking at the report from the other groups, it seemed very, very clear that that voters are tired of seeing folks with a lack of access to medical care, whether it's for mental illness or substance abuse issues, sitting on the street. I mean, as we know, healthcare is a very popular issue. And it's obviously become even more apparent in the pandemic, the need for access to healthcare. Voters are very clear that mental health care, access to substance use treatment is part of medical care, and are completely dismayed that we are letting people who are extremely ill reside on the street.
Thank you, Sarah. Any Peter or Derry, anything you want to add related to mental health?
I can elaborate just briefly, Miguel. It is clear that folks are, we keep saying this, empathetic. People who have mental health issues, they want those people to be put in good hands, housed someplace where they have access to the services they need, where they are safe from themselves and from others. And for more broadly, the availability of health services, they want all homeless people to be getting the services they need to deal with what they're dealing with.
I just use it maybe to talk a little bit about Sacramento. Miguel and I were on a briefing from the governor's office a couple of days ago, and it's clear that mental health issues are very much on the mind of Governor Newsom, and that there will be funding in the budget that's coming up. And I think we should think about how best to coordinate on that and make use of it. At the same time, I think if you like, vertical coordination and collaboration between Sacramento and local authorities needs to be improved. And in fact, levels of tension need to be decreased in order for everybody to be able to do this. We believe that the state of California has a role in helping there be an accountable structure that works with all the actors here. And we also think that there needs to be sustained and really effective dialogue between those two levels. Thanks.
So there's been a number of questions sort of since Houston has been raised, and others make comparison to New York and other cities where the way those cities are organized, it allows for greater coordination because there is one mayor in charge, or it's a city-county integrated integration system. So the questions are really, can that really work in LA when we're governed so differently? It's designed to be not centralized. And so I'll answer that question from someone who's worked at the city and the county for most of my career, and really speaking to the candidates about the opportunity that they have today as trying to propose solutions is to imagine breaking out of the current way in which we think about this issue and being clear that no solution by itself will work if it's not coordinated. So there's a lot of different ways of approaching that, and we offered one not too long ago. But there could be, imagine an existence of one coordinated voice around what we need from Sacramento and from Washington, D.C. There currently isn't one plan around that. And so there's what ends up happening, and we heard this in the focus group, is that people can't see the difference that these new revenues are bringing into the region. All of this unprecedented investment from the federal government, from the state, even locally, as Angelenos have taxed themselves, is being diluted in the eyes of Angelenos because it's not accountable, and there's no plan to actually monitor progress and to provide a path forward. It's all ad hoc, and really, while a lot of great work is being done, it's not being done in a way that is measurable.
And Miguel, if I could maybe follow up on that, I think there's an opportunity here, and there also needs to be a challenge. The opportunity is we've got a lot of new blood coming into LA officialdom, right? We've got a campaign year, and all of those candidates know that this is the number one issue on voters' minds. So there's a lot of opportunity for people to step up and say, this is precisely how I would collaborate with others in order to do this. These are the commitments I make. These are the partnerships that I will strike. But I think the challenge is also to say that we are concerned that it's not natural for people to give up power and authority. It's just not a natural part of human nature. And yet that's what we need here. We need to chip away 5%, 10% of individual autonomy and reinvest that in being able to do work well together. So please, for people looking at leadership roles in LA, take advantage of the opportunity now. Make statements about how you can do this. And then let's all confront that challenge together. Thanks.
Sarah.
I would just add, again, this is we listened to a bunch of voters, and the opportunity here is that voters are way more sophisticated and knowledgeable than maybe they've been in the past on this issue. And the level of frustration with people dying on the street, with the lack of progress, was clear. But they're also not willing to buy simple, just sweep people away solutions. So I think that there's so much opportunity in this moment for us to embark on bigger systems change, to break the cycles that cause unsheltered homelessness. And I think that it's clear that that's what the voters want, is they're willing to buy into a very big goal, that as long as it's realistic, there's clear transparency and accountability, and that really also respects sort of the diversity of LA, and puts that it really has the opportunity to get a different approach in all regions. So I just wanted to make sure it's clear. That's what voters are saying.
Thank you, Sarah. There were a number of questions about the need for more resources. If that's really what's missing here, more dollars to combat the problem from the federal government, the state, locally. Darian, Ethan, could you talk a little bit about how the issue of resources surfaced and what are voters saying about that?
Ethan, you want to go first, and then I'll.
Sure. I mean, from voters' perspective, the answer to that question is a pretty clear no. There's not an appetite at this point for raising more taxes or dedicating more resources to this issue. And a huge part of the reason for that is there is widespread awareness of HHH, as has been mentioned. People invested a lot of hope in HHH as a potential solution for homelessness, which people saw as a growing issue even at that point. And they've only seen the issue get worse over the last few years. While there's some awareness that this is, COVID has a lot to do with it, and there's a lot of reasons for this, they're just not seeing the results from that, which has soured people on the idea of additional resources and funding.
To echo what you said, Ethan, the answer is there is zero interest. I mean, if somebody came to me and said, can we run a campaign to raise taxes for a bond, or if a candidate wanted to talk about raising taxes to resolve homelessness, it's a loser for two reasons. One, as Ethan said, they are well aware, frankly, much more aware than I thought they would be of H and Triple H, and they have, as I said earlier, see no results. And number two, to be inelegant about this, they see this against a backdrop of corruption in LA city government, to be blunt about it. So no, this is not a time to ask for more money. And if I could add one thing here, context is important, because, and this was mentioned earlier, we're in an election year, and they're going to be apparently, filing ends tomorrow, or wait a minute, I take that back, on the 12th Saturday. There's going to be a whole bunch of people running for mayor, and there'll be a lot of other elections going on in LA County. And, to the extent that candidates choose to try to duke it out with each other as having the most efficacious plan to resolve homelessness, voters see that as yada, yada, yada. It's just not a winner. They don't believe any of that. And so if I was advising somebody running for office this year, I'd say, look, you can go ahead and try to elbow everybody else out and prove you're the bestest on homelessness. It's going to fall largely on deaf ears. Voters want a different kind of answers. They don't want divisiveness. They want accountability, and they want solutions. And I just hope, for everybody's sake, that the people running for office, instead of making this a political football, talk about homelessness in a way that is consistent with what voters are looking for.
Thank you. So we're coming to a close. So I'm going to ask each one of the panelists to sort of give some closing comments based on what we heard from Angelenos. And I'll frame it this way in terms of, again, giving advice to those seeking office. What should they most pay attention to based on what we heard from Angelenos? So Sarah, I'm going to start with you, then Peter.
I mean, I think what impressed me the most about listening directly to voters was that as I've said before, the level of frustration matched with empathy. I want to see somebody cared for. I want to see progress on this issue. And I think that, look, not everybody in the focus groups was completely empathetic, but the fact that people remain interested in seeing progress and remain very connected to this issue on a very personal level is something to keep top of mind. And also the fact that people are really open to systems change and really thinking about changing cycles that just hasn't really been there before. So when I've been experiencing or been a part of focus groups, so I think the fact that people are really open to some big change and remain empathetic despite our overriding anger and frustration presents a huge opportunity in this moment.
Peter.
Similar to Sarah, I mean, the heartening part of this is first, we see the engagement of voters, the desire for improvement, and the sophistication of their knowledge. Second, we know what works technically. We know that it's permanent housing and supportive services, but we need the coordination and accountability to make those happen. We simply cannot continue with business as usual, and we need leaders to step up their game significantly. Clear commitment to collaborating effectively, clear measurable targets, and a clear plan to get to the elimination of homelessness. Thanks.
Ethan.
I mean, I would echo what's already been said, but also just the intense desire to really make progress on this issue. There's a real appetite for sort of a new regime, a new way of thinking about this. And, I think provided we're meeting voters' sense of sophistication about this issue and addressing the sort of accountability issues that they make very clear, I think there's potentially a lot of enthusiasm for new solutions on this issue, because it's clearly a top of mind issue, the likes of which you rarely see in qualitative research.
And Derry.
I don't want to repeat everything you've heard, because you've gotten a very accurate perception of what we found. For me, my advice to everybody who's seeing this and everybody who's running for office is, please take to heart what it is that we learned. Over the years that I've been in this business, I've sat through many focus groups where there was great divisiveness, there was very anger, hostility. I mean, anybody who was around in 1994 with Prop 187, these are not the kind of results we saw. We saw tremendous hostility back in those days. This is a situation in which you've heard over and over again that voters are sophisticated about this. They understand what's going on. They are empathetic, but they are tired of being fearful. They're tired of being disgusted. They're tired of their elected officials not solving the problem. And the answer here is, again, not more yada, 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 but for everybody who is involved in this to come together. It's not going to be easy, and start to figure out a collaborative effort that will get done what the voters expect and think they deserve to get done.
Thank you, Derry, and thank you to all the panelists and for the work that was done. For me, I think the messages are very clear. Angelenos are very proximate to this issue. They experience it in their daily lives, and they feel compassion for the unhoused, particularly those suffering from mental illness and addiction. They are very angry that there is no system to house and treat the most vulnerable. And they really respect the perspective of those who have experienced homelessness and believe that their struggle provides critical insight on the solutions needed to end homelessness. The thing that also is very important is that Angelenos have astutely diagnosed the problem. Efforts to respond to the crisis have been disjointed, uncoordinated, lacking transparency, and not at the scale that's needed. They don't see any accountability on how their tax dollars are being spent, no regional plan to evaluate progress, no consensus on the best practices to deal with the crisis, but most of all, they don't see anyone in charge. As you heard, Angelenos have lost faith in local government to reduce homelessness, but they haven't given up, and they offer important insights as to what the answer should to be. To fill the obvious void, Angelenos want an independent entity that tells them the truth, offers clear data, leads in building consensus around a comprehensive and realistic plan. They want a transparent body with measurable, realistic goals, one that is ambitious enough to generate momentum needed to move people into treatment and housing. During this election year, candidates are running for supervisor, LA County, mayor, and city council, and they're feeling tremendous pressure to offer the panacea, the secret sauce to deal with this chronic issue. We urge each of you to listen carefully to what Angelenos have to say. Don't misinterpret their legitimate frustration and hostility as an excuse to take a unilateral approach. Angelenos know that no mayor can end homelessness on their own when treatment for mental illness and addiction is entirely under the county control. Thank you all for joining us today. The report is on the No Going Back LA website for the Committee for Greater Los Angeles. We encourage you to sign up, get involved, learn about the work that we're doing, and most of all, to be engaged on this issue during this important election season. Thank you all very much for joining us.